My name is Claire Maddox. I'm 31 years old. I'm a bookkeeper. And the most important thing I ever balanced wasn't a client ledger or a quarterly report. It was a tin recipe box that sat on my grandmother's kitchen counter for as long as I can remember. Faded blue, the lid bent slightly at one corner, painted with white daisies that had worn down to ghosts over the years. She kept her recipes in it, or so everyone thought. My Uncle Dennis laughed at the will reading. Not a polite laugh. Not a nervous one. The kind of laugh a man releases when he believes he has already won, when the verdict is, in his mind, a formality. He sat across the table from me with his hands folded and said the line I will never forget. She was 84 and confused. That will doesn't mean anything. The lawyer didn't respond. I didn't respond. I just looked at my hands and thought about the tin box, about the last time I had opened it, about what was underneath the recipes. 3 months later, Dennis walked out of a courtroom with considerably less certainty than he had carried into that conference room. I want to tell you exactly how we got there. My grandmother's name was Ruth Eleanor Maddox. Everyone called her Nana Ruth. She was the kind of woman who pressed flowers between the pages of books she had already read twice, who kept every birthday card she ever received in a shoebox under the bed, organized by year, rubber-banded in groups of 10, who made coffee at 5:30 in the morning because she said the quiet before sunrise was the best part of the day and she didn't want to miss it by sleeping. I was close to her the way you are close to someone who sees you without asking you to explain yourself. She never once made me feel like a guest in her house. From the time I was small, I had my own drawer in her spare bedroom, just mine, with my name on a piece of masking tape in her handwriting. That drawer stayed mine until the day she died. My father is her son. His name is Gary, and he is a steady, quiet man who taught high school history for 30 years and believes, deeply and sometimes to his own detriment, that most conflicts resolve themselves if you give them enough time. He and Nana Ruth were close in the way that similar people are close, not dramatic, not demonstrative, just consistent. His brother Dennis was different. Dennis is 15 years younger than my father, the second child, the one Nana Ruth had after a gap long enough that people used to call him her surprise. He grew up in a different house than my father. In a sense, same address, different circumstances, because by the time Dennis arrived, the family had more money and Nana Ruth had more time, and Dennis had learned very early that the combination of those two things worked in his favor if he asked for them at the right moment. He was charming. I want to be fair about that. Dennis had a way of filling a room that my father never had. Louder, funnier, the one who remembered everyone's drink order and called the waitress by name. Nana Ruth lit up when he walked in. That was simply true, and I watched it my whole life without resentment, or so I told myself. My father watched it too. He never said anything. He had learned very early that saying something about Dennis in front of Nana Ruth was a conversation that only ended one way. I was a bookkeeper by the time I was 24, not because it was thrilling. Because I am wired for it, for the way numbers have to account for themselves, for the discipline of a ledger that cannot lie if you read it carefully enough. Every entry tells you something. The gaps tell you more. I did Nana Ruth's personal finances for the last 6 years of her life. Simple stuff at first, bill pay, insurance renewals, the occasional investment statement I'd help her read. She was sharp until nearly the end, but she told me she felt better knowing someone she trusted was watching the columns. I watched the columns. And for 2 of those 6 years, I noticed something I did not want to notice. I want to be honest about who I was before all of this, because I wasn't brave. I was a woman who had spent a long time building very good reasons to look away from things that made her uncomfortable. The first time I saw a transfer I couldn't reconcile, I told myself it was an error. Nana Ruth had moved money to Dennis before. She was generous. She was his mother. That was allowed. The second time, I noted in the margin of my own copy of her statement and said nothing. The third time, I asked her about it, and she said Dennis had needed help with something and she had handled it. I closed my notebook and changed the subject. That is not a heroic paragraph.
I know that.
But it is an honest one. I had watched my father go quiet every time Dennis's name came up in a certain way. I had watched him start sentences and stop them. Once, when I was 17, I heard him tell my mother that he had tried to talk to Nana Ruth about Dennis and the money, and Nana Ruth had told him that Dennis was her child too, and she would decide how to love him. My father had gone into the kitchen and stood at the sink for a long time with the water running and not washing anything. He wasn't afraid of Dennis. He was tired. There is a difference. He had fought the same fight enough times to know where it ended, and where it ended was alone. I told myself that Nana Ruth's money was Nana Ruth's business. I told myself she was competent and informed and making her own choices. Both of those things were true. What I was less honest about was why I had stopped asking questions I already knew the answers to. The tin recipe box sat on her counter the entire time. Nana Ruth died in September, on a morning that was already going cold the way early falls do in Michigan, with the bedroom window open because she liked to hear the yard. My father called me from the hospital. His voice was the steadiest it ever gets when something is breaking underneath it. He said her name. He said she had gone quietly. He said he would handle the calls. I drove to the house that afternoon. Not for any official reason, just because I needed to be somewhere that still smelled like her. My father was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with his hands wrapped around a mug he wasn't drinking from. Dennis arrived 2 hours later with his wife, Carol, and a voice that was already at the volume he used for rooms he intended to manage. He hugged my father. He looked around the kitchen. His eyes moved the way eyes move when they are inventorying rather than grieving. I watched him from across the room and said nothing. The tin recipe box was on the counter, where it always was. The will reading was scheduled 3 weeks later at the office of Nana Ruth's attorney, a woman named Patricia Hale who had handled her affairs for over a decade. My father and I arrived together. Dennis arrived with Carol and a posture that said he had already done the math. Patricia read the document in the careful, neutral voice of someone who has delivered news like this before and has long since learned not to editorialize. The house, the savings, and the personal property all passed to me. A modest bequest to my father. A smaller one to Dennis, a specific dollar amount, clearly stated. Dennis's face went through several things before it settled on the one he decided to use. He chose dismissal. He leaned back in his chair and actually smiled, the slow one that meant he was already 3 moves ahead in his own mind. He looked at my father.
He looked at me.
She was 84 and confused. That doesn't mean anything. Patricia said nothing. My father looked at his hands. I looked at mine. Then Dennis said he would be contesting the will on grounds of diminished capacity and undue influence. He said I had managed to insert myself into her finances and her trust, and that a woman in her condition could be led anywhere by someone patient enough. He said it all very calmly, which was the most unsettling version of it. He walked out without looking at either of us. My father and I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes without speaking. Finally, he said, quiet and even. She knew what she was doing, Claire. He said it like a man defending something he had believed for a long time without anyone asking him to say it out loud. I told him I knew. What I didn't tell him was that I had one more thing to check before I was certain. I went back to the house that evening alone. The kitchen was the same as it had been the day before and the decade before that. The same curtains, the same arrangement of mugs on the second shelf, the same wooden stool tucked under the counter where she used to sit and do her crossword. The tin box was where it always was beside the stove between the salt and the olive oil. Faded blue, lid bent at one corner, white daisies worn to ghosts. I had opened that box hundreds of times in my life. I knew the contents by heart. The index cards in her handwriting, the ones with the splattered edges from decades of use. The apple cake recipe on the card with the torn corner. The chicken soup that took 2 days. The sugar cookies she made every Christmas that nobody had ever successfully replicated from the instructions she wrote, because she always left out one step that existed only in her hands. I lifted the lid. The recipes were on top, exactly where they always were. Underneath them was a manila envelope, sealed, with my name on it in her handwriting. I sat down on the wooden stool and held it for a long time without opening it. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the yard made its early fall sounds, the particular settling of a season changing its mind. She had put my name on it, not my father's, not Dennis's.
Mine.
I opened it. Inside was a letter, 3 pages, handwritten. And behind the letter, a separate section she had labeled simply, "The Record." I am not going to read you every word of her letter. Some of it belongs only to me. But I will tell you what she said because it is the reason everything that followed was possible. She wrote that she had known, for longer than she had admitted even to herself, what Dennis had been doing. Not confusion. Not generosity misread. She had known. She wrote that over 23 years, Dennis had come to her in moments of pressure or convenience with requests that began as loans and ended as nothing. Small amounts first, then larger ones. Always with a reason, always with a promise, always with the particular warmth he deployed when he wanted something and understood that warmth was the fastest way to it. She wrote that she had let it happen for a long time because he was her son, and she had loved him in the stubborn, specific way a mother loves a child she has always found harder to reach. She wrote that she understood she had failed my father by protecting Dennis from consequences he had earned, and she wrote that she was sorry for it in the particular way a woman is sorry when she sees a mistake clearly and understands it is too late to fully correct it. But she had done what she could. Behind her letter was the record she had kept. 31 pages. Every transaction. Every date. Every amount. Each one signed by Dennis, a signature she had required, she wrote, because she was a woman who had lived long enough to know the difference between a promise and a document. She had made him sign every time. He had signed because he thought the receipts were only for her comfort. He did not understand that she was building something, a ledger that a bookkeeper could read. I sat on that stool for a long time. Then I called a lawyer. The total across 31 pages, 23 years, and 47 separate transactions was $340,000. Not a gift, not inheritance received early. Under Ohio law, my attorney explained, documented transfers made with the expectation of repayment, as evidenced by the signed receipts, could be treated as loans outstanding against an estate. Dennis had not simply received money. He had signed for money he had never returned. The will was not the whole story. It never had been. Nana Ruth had not left her estate in spite of Dennis. She had left it with full knowledge of exactly what he had taken, what he had signed for, and what a court would be able to see when someone laid it out in plain columns on a table. She hadn't been confused. She had been patient. Dennis filed his challenge 6 weeks after the will reading. The grounds, as his attorney presented them, were diminished capacity and undue influence. The argument was that Nana Ruth had been susceptible in her final years and that I, her bookkeeper granddaughter with access to her accounts, had positioned myself to benefit. It was a coherent argument if you knew nothing. It began to come apart the moment it met the evidence. My attorney submitted the will, which Patricia Hale had drawn up with a detailed competency note attached, standard practice for estates anticipated to face challenge. 2 of Nana Ruth's physicians confirmed in writing that she had been assessed as fully competent at the time of signing. Her own handwriting in the letter was clear, organized, and specific. Then we submitted the tin box. Not literally, but the contents of it. 31 pages of signed receipts, photocopied and dated, with a summary ledger I had prepared myself, because it is what I do. I think in columns. I showed the court the columns. Dennis's attorney asked for more time. The judge gave him 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, Dennis called my father 3 times. My father told me about the calls in the same flat voice he used when he was deciding what he believed. Dennis said I had manipulated Nana Ruth. My father said he did not believe that. Dennis said the receipts were informal, meaningless.
My father said they had signatures on them.
Dennis said the family should handle this privately. My father was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I will carry for the rest of my life.
Dennis.
She made him sign every time. Did you ever ask yourself why she needed him to sign? Dennis hung up. My father called me that evening. He didn't explain the call. He just said, I should have said something sooner, Claire. About the money. I knew and I went quiet and I'm sorry. 7 words that cost him something. I told him it was enough. It was enough. The hearing was on a Thursday in January. It was not dramatic in the way people expect court to be dramatic. There was no shouting, no surprise witness, no moment where someone broke down and confessed. There was a judge, 2 attorneys, a table of documents, and the particular quiet of a proceeding where one side has the paperwork and the other side has the feelings. Dennis's attorney argued diminished capacity. My attorney submitted the physician letters. Dennis's attorney argued undue influence. My attorney submitted 11 years of correspondence between Nana Ruth and Patricia Hale, her attorney, showing consistent, independent decision-making, including the specific instruction that the estate plan be structured to withstand contest. She had anticipated this. Of course she had. Then my attorney laid out the ledger. 31 transactions. 47 signed receipts. $340,000. A summary column showing 0 repayments across 23 years. Dennis sat at his table and looked at the documents the way people look at something they signed without reading carefully enough. The judge reviewed the record in a silence that was itself a kind of answer. She asked Dennis's attorney twice to clarify the basis for the capacity claim. Both times the answer was thin. The challenge was denied. Dennis walked out of that courtroom with the specific posture of a man who had arrived with a story and left without it. No laughter. No certainty. Carol kept her hand on his arm the entire way to the parking lot. He did not look at me or my father. My father and I stood on the courthouse steps in the January cold for a moment. He put his hand briefly on my shoulder. That was all. It was enough. There is a version of this story where I feel triumphant. I want to be honest, I don't. Not really. What I feel is the specific quiet of a thing that has been finished. The ledger closed. The columns balanced. The entry that had been pending for 23 years finally reconciled. Nana Ruth left me the house, which I have kept. I sit sometimes in the kitchen on the wooden stool where I read her letter, and the counter is the same, and the curtains are the same, and the coffee at 5:30 in the morning is the same, because some things are worth keeping exactly as they were. The tin box is there too. Faded blue, lid bent at one corner, daisies worn to ghosts. The recipes are still inside it. I cook from them sometimes, the apple cake, the sugar cookies, the chicken soup that takes 2 days. I have not figured out the missing step in the cookies. I don't think I'm supposed to. I think she left that one on purpose. What I understand now that I did not fully understand when I was a young bookkeeper making excuses for numbers that didn't reconcile is this. Nana Ruth never needed me to fight for her. She had already done that herself, one signed receipt at a time, one careful entry at a time, in a record that weighted 31 pages deep in a tin box under the apple cake recipe, patient as a foundation. She gave it to me because she knew I could read it, because she knew I would, not because I was the favorite, not because I had earned it through some competition I didn't know I was in, but because she had watched me for 31 years and understood that what I would do with the truth was hold it carefully and let it speak for itself. Dennis thought she was confused. She was the clearest person in any room she ever entered. And on the last morning she sat at that counter, in the quiet before sunrise that she said was the best part of the day, she left me everything I needed in the only place she knew I would eventually look. The tin holds what matters, Claire, not the pantry. I didn't understand that when she first said it. I was 14, and she was pressing a daisy into the back pages of a novel, and I thought she was being poetic. She was being precise. She always was.